ladies did an exceptional job, and maybe perhaps some of the men involved in that, but I thank you for that wonderful meal and the wonderful hospitality. Appreciate you and your stand and your service for God in this area. Our primary text this evening is going to be 1 Peter chapter 5. If you want to turn there and mark that, and then go over to the book of Titus chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 5, and we'll get there in just a few moments, and then Titus chapter 1. And as you're turning there, I want to, up front, make the declaration, I love godly elders. I believe in them, I support them, I endorse them, I encourage them. And I love godly elders, and elders who are not what they ought to be. I thought about this a moment ago. I don't necessarily stand against them, but I will say that I believe we should help them to become what they ought to be. In Titus chapter 1 and verse 5, I thought this was very fitting for the theme of the lectureship, setting the church in order, where Paul said, "For this reason I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking, and appoint elders in every city as I commanded you." And interestingly, that phrase, set in order, in the original is one word that is a medical term that was used of setting a broken bone. If you think about the context of this statement of Paul to Titus in this occasion, that God considers a congregation without elders as broken. He says things that are lacking. In the sight of God, when there are no elders, it is lacking. Now, let me say this, that I'm not endorsing or suggesting appointing men who are not qualified.
Amen.
I'm not suggesting that the congregations that do not have elders, there's something wrong with them from the standpoint of their faithfulness. They can still be a sound congregation in the Lord's sight. But it's not as God designed it.
Right.
If I were to ask you the question, and I did this in preparation, several of the men at home, I asked them, what would you say is the greatest need in the Lord's church today? I liked one man's response concerning evangelism, and I'm thankful for the men at home and their thoughts of evangelism, constantly thinking of evangelism, and I agree with him. That is a great need, and we need to be more evangelistic minded. Maybe preachers need better preachers or more preachers, and that may or may not be the case, and I'm certainly thankful for congregations that have the foresight to be willing to make the sacrifices to train men. But in my opinion, I believe it is elders is the greatest need. I pulled the latest directory that I have, and it's several years old. I believe the date on it was 2006 for North and South Carolina. And let me share these with you. In North Carolina, I counted 152 congregations. And I know that one that they overlooked, and I know one that has since disbanded. So if you do the math, you still have 152. You know how many of those 152 have elders? 1/3. 50. 50 out of 152, and in South Carolina there was 109 congregations with 24, and I know there was a mistake, 25 that have elders, about a quarter of the congregation. In 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1, Paul said, if a man desires the office of a bishop, there's that word desire, and I immediately think, and as I never appoint a man, suggest appointing a man that does not have a desire. But here's my question. Why doesn't he have that desire? He may have his reasons. Then again, he may just have some excuses. You know, Moses has his. You know how God viewed Moses' excuse. We need to do some soul searching and some honest examination of ourselves to see, is my reason for not desiring that position, is it legitimate? Is it because I just don't want to be burdened with the trouble? I believe if that is one's position, that if they're going to be honest with themselves and come to that position and understanding, then they may be just like that one-talent man in Matthew 25. Not every man is cut out to be a leader, I understand But I believe wholeheartedly in that if the church is going to be what it is, it ought to be in the sight of God. If it's going to be set in order, then it's going to come down to this subject when we have godly elders leading God's people as they ought to lead. My subject has been announced as the authority of elders, and I'm not going to talk to you about what they can do and what they can't do. I want to approach this with two simple points, and it's focused on their authority, but it's what they must be doing in order to be pleasing to God. I want to start out with establishing the authority of elders, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time with scriptures proving to you that elders have authority. I know that's a big issue and has been a big issue. And let me say this, that the authority is in the ship. There is no individual elder that has any authority whatsoever. The elders, as a body of men, have the authority. I knew of a fellow gospel preacher, and he was talking to me. He was having some struggles there, and he said one of my elders came to me and told me I could not use a particular translation. And he had not conferred with the other elders. That was his decision. That was his. And I said he didn't have that authority. Now the elders, if they get together and tell you that, they have that authority, I believe. If they have their scriptural reasons, they have the authority to say, this is a translation that we want you to steer away from, and here's why. The authority that elders have is an authority that is delegated. No elder has authority from within himself. He don't get to make up the rules. Right here is the governing factors. The authority is given and the authority is governed by the teaching of the New Testament for any and all elders. So let's go to 1 Peter chapter 5, and I want to take just a moment, and I am going to be using the New King James Version this evening, and I want to read these first 4 verses, and we're going to draw some things from this and some other passages that have similar thoughts to it. But in 1 Peter 5, verse 1, Peter said, the elders who are among you I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed, shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by constraint, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, not as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. Interestingly note, there is, in one form or another, all 3 words that are used for the elder. There's 3 different words used in the New Testament: presbyteros, poimen, and episkopos, and all 3 of them, either in the noun or the verb form, are found in these verses. Peter said for them to, the New King James, shepherd the flock, or New King James, to feed the flock of God. And this word for shepherd or to feed is a word that means to feed or to pasture, to tend a flock, to direct, to superintend. Listen to him. This is Persbacher. He says to rule. Now I believe right there, as far as I need to go to establish, elders have authority. The same word is used, interestingly, in Revelation 2 and verse 7, and the King James, New King James says, he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and one literal translation I have literally says, he shall shepherd them with an iron rod of iron. And the same word used in Acts 20 verse 28, and you can put a mark there, we'll go there in a moment, to feed or to shepherd the flock, which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. I found an interesting thought from Rogers and Rogers. They said of this word to shepherd that in the aorist construction it is ingressive, and it has the idea to take up the task of shepherding, or it may call for a specific act with a note of urgency. Now I cited that because of that. I think we need to see the urgency in matters of souls. And as leaders of God's people, we need not to sit back and think we'll get around to it. I have one of those if you need it. My wife gave it to me when I started school, and it ruined my life. I have my round to it. Again, this word used in Acts 20, verse 28. And then Peter says that they were serving as overseers. Again, the King James says, taking the oversight thereof. J.P. Green, in his literal translation, says, exercising oversight. And this is the verb form of the word for elders, the episkopos, one who oversees, and it is an overseer, an overlooker, or a caretaker. And again, a similar form of this is found in Acts 20, verse 28. There's a lot of parallels between that passage and this one. The same word is translated 3 times with the English word visit, and I'll say more about that in a moment, in Matthew 25:36, and in Hebrews 2:6, and James 1 and verse 27. Now these 2 words that we have cited here, to shepherd the flock or to serve as overseers, I'm going to suggest to you that there's 2 things implied in these words, in the usages of these words. And number one, it implies authority. To shepherd or to oversee something has demanded that authority has been delegated to you. I thought about different illustrations that I could use of this, and the best one is if I gave you the oversight of my child. If I tell you that I want you to watch my son for me, you are his overseer. You are watching him. You are taking care of him. You are his caretaker. And I've given you the authority to do so. Otherwise, you're going to be arrested for kidnapping. Number 2, both of these words also imply accountability. I will hold you accountable for what you do or don't do with my son. I delegate authority to you that I want you to have him in bed by 9 o'clock. I want you to make sure he brushes his teeth, and the list may go on. I may give you a whole book of lists of what I want you to do and not to do. And when I come back to get my son, guess who's going to be held accountable if he's had 14 snack cakes and stayed up to 12:30? There's accountability. You know, the phrase in this passage remind us it's not your sheep. Peter said the flock of God, verse 2. And in verse 3, those entrusted to you. God has put you in a very special position, and He has entrusted something very valuable to Him under your care. I love both my sons dearly. And don't you believe, as you would, that we're going to want answers if something happens. One man referred to the elders in this passage as under shepherds. Over in the book of Hebrews, chapter 13 and verse number 17 is a reference to elders, and I believe that you'll see both of these aspects mentioned in that verse, where the writer says, obey those who have those who rule over you. There's your authority. And be submissive, for they watch for your souls as those who must give an account. There's your accountability. If you don't get anything else, I hope those 2 points stick in our minds. That's enough for us to want to love and support and encourage our elders, because they've been given a great task. They're not going to be perfect men. No more than I'll ever be a perfect man. But God loves elders. And we should too. Go a little bit further in this, and let's notice the elders' authority qualified. And in verses 2 and 3, there's 3 sets of contrasting statements given here, and it's interesting. I'm just going to spend a moment on these. In verse 2, the latter part there, or about the middle part, not by compulsion but willingly, it's a reference to their attitude. Nobody forced them to do this. If you've been forced into serving as an elder, I'm almost assured you're not going to be as effective as you need to be. It's not by compulsion. You've not been coerced. It goes back to that desire thing. Oh, it's a great responsibility, but you realize what God has given and what God expects. And I think it comes down to, here am I, Lord, send me. You talk about all these congregations in North and South Carolina, and we're not exclusive to the problem. It goes throughout the world. Why aren't we working to instill in our young men the desire to be God's men to lead? That's where we'll fix the problem. When we start with our young men just in diapers. And not just the men, the young ladies, to encourage them. Let me tell you, there will never be a good elder that doesn't have a good woman standing beside him. Number 2, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly. You know, there's an aspect here that we may be a little disconnected from, because in the first century, there may or may not have been elders who received pay or compensation for their work. I don't know how common the practice is. I do know 1 Timothy 5:17 authorizes the pay for elders. I thought, what a great thing. Here's a man wanting to do this great task. I don't know of any elders that receive pay, but wouldn't it be great for a man to say, look, I can't quit my job to do what I want to do, and the congregation saying, we'll make that possible for you. We'll support you financially because it's that important for you to lead us. Number 3, verse 3. Nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples of the flock. 3 times there is this statement, then the but. And this has been so taken out of context and so misunderstood. There's false conclusions and false concepts throughout the brotherhood concerning this. There was a movement at one time, and it may still be in the brotherhood, I don't know, I haven't ran into it, that says the elders have no authority except their example. I know Brother Warren, I listened to some material and read some material from him as he dealt with that, and it just simply is not so. How many of us sitting here tonight, have gathered here tonight, who do not have the responsibility given by God to be a good example? You're not excluded. If you're a Christian, you're an example. That's not what Peter's talking about. If you look at the context, it's that contrast. This being example is in a contrast to being the Lord over. He has authority, but he's not a boss. It has the idea of merely throwing his weight around. But he's going to set the example of what a Christian is by the way he leads. How he exercises that authority. For the life of me, I can't see that clock in the back. I'm thankful for the brother that's going to tell me 5 minutes. There's another false or misunderstanding in the brotherhood concerning exactly what the elder has authority over. Some says, well, he just has authority over maybe the bank account, the physical. Then the only authority he has is over the spiritual. I'm going to suggest to you that he has authority over all things. And it's governed by the New Testament. You mean the elder come in my house and tell me what magazine to subscribe to? No, not necessarily. But if he comes in your house and finds a magazine that you ought not to have, he's got the authority to discipline you, the elders. I had an elder, when I was in school of preaching, asked me to park in a specific way, and one of my fellow students got all bent out of shape. He don't have authority to tell you where to park. And I said, one, it wasn't just him, it was the eldership, and they gave me the reason, and I believe they did have that authority. And I was willing to submit to them. Now, if they just wanted me to boss me around, tell me how to park, then that's a different story, but they gave me the reason. There was a legitimate reason behind it. Let's move on. Let's look next in this passage in verse 4. He gives, in a roundabout way, he gives this example or illustration of a proper shepherd or elder. And in verse number 4, the first part, when he alludes when the chief shepherd appeared. Well, we know who that is. In Hebrews 13 and verse 20 and John 10, he's referred to as the great shepherd or the good shepherd. And you just stop and analyze the life of your Lord. How did he exercise the position of a shepherd while he was here on this earth? Didn't he say, I lay down my life for the sheep? He loved them dearly. Then the rest of verse 4, there's the reward of the elders. And he says, when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. Now, that's referring to heaven, and that is a crown we all have waiting. But here's a man that he's dedicated, and he's decided, and he's determined, I'm going to lead God's flock. And it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. It's going to be the most challenging thing you've ever done. You're going to have the most sleepless nights. And ladies, you're going to be robbed of some time from your husband because of it. But there's no greater work. You remember 1 Timothy 3 and verse 1, if a man desires to be an elder or a bishop, he desires a good work. And concerning the labors we have in Christ, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15:58, your labor is not in vain. Yes, it's going to be tough. Yes, it's going to be challenging. Oh, but the great reward. Great reward. Now, I just went through that, and I used up far more time, and I hope, in just establishing the elders. Now, let's look at the authority enacted. And I want to look at their work, and again, quickly go through this. You and I, as Christians, we've been compared as sheep. And if you know anything about my shepherd, if you know anything about a sheep, they can't do anything for themselves. You don't just turn sheep out there and say, good luck with it. They have to have a shepherd. They cannot provide for themselves. And as elders, you are the shepherd over God's flock, God's heritage here on earth, and you are to provide for the sheep's needs. Psalm 23, verse 1, the Lord is, and by the way, in the original, I understand the emphasis is on the personal pronouns. David was really saying, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not, and the translation won't, that doesn't mean about all these little things you hope to have. It literally, I think the best translation is the word lack. Talking about the necessities that you need, I will not lack. Because I've got a shepherd to provide. Go back over to that translation of the word from a moment ago from 1 Peter 5:2. That word to shepherd, and I said it, or to oversee, has the idea of visit, translated visit. James chapter 1:27, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. That doesn't mean to stop in and say, hey, how you doing? The word means to look in, to inspect, with the view of assisting in the needs. Now that's how this word is used. Shepherds oversee, overlook, superintend God's heritage. Matthew 25:36, I was sick and you visited me not. Same word. Listen to this one, Hebrews 2 verse 6. What is man that you're mindful of him, or the Son of Man, talking about us humans, or the Son of Man that you, King James says visit, the New King James translates it, take care of him. There's your work of an elder. The elder oversees or shepherds God's flock, and this involves, let me name some specifics here, it involves provisions. This may be in the book, I can't remember. I forgot about the outline, and Brother Sapp caught me in Tennessee, and I threw something together. It involves spiritual nutrition. She can't feed themselves, and the shepherd's here to give us the proper nutrients. Remember, Jesus told Peter in John 21, feed my sheep. That's the same work as an elder. How does the elders feed the sheep? Well, you provide for them. Spiritual nourishment. You do that by your own teaching. You do that by the men that you put in this pulpit. By the men you put in the Bible classes. By the ladies you put in the Bible classes for the children. You're feeding the sheep. You're providing for the spiritual nourishment. And that's one of their qualifications, isn't it? Apt to teach. Have the ability to teach. One of the provisions is providing spiritual guidance. The spiritual well-being. Isaiah said, and it's cited earlier in 1 Peter, all we like sheep have gone astray. Every one of us. Every one of us. We let sin in our lives. We brought it in. We sold ourselves to slavery. Jesus freed us by His blood, and we are now His followers. We are His sheep. And we need that guidance. Psalm 23 verse 2. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Again, Acts 20, verse 28, therefore take heed to yourselves, to the elders, and to all the flock. Interesting on that word, take heed. You better be aware. You better be cautious. What happens when a sheep wanders off? I'm asking seriously. Don't answer me out loud, but think to yourself. In congregations that you know of, maybe here, maybe elsewhere, when a member falls away, what happens? Realistically, have you noticed brother so-and-so and sister so-and-so haven't been here for, well, I don't even know how long, when I saw them last. That shouldn't be if there's elders, and if there's no elders, the men of the congregation there's no congregation that does not have leadership. If you have a congregation that doesn't have elders, the men have the responsibility. It may not be the leadership it needs to be, but there's leadership there, and you better be doing what you ought to be doing. I was reading in Luke 15 about this one sheep that wandered off, and here's the 99. What does he do? He leaves the 99. It's not that he's not concerned about them, but the emphasis is his concern for that one. He looks for it till he finds it. Now, if I'm that lost sheep, I'm thankful for that, aren't you? My soul's at stake. Go over to James 5, and you may disagree with me on that, and I don't consider this a position of doctrine. It's a matter of opinion. I want you to go to James 5. I want to show you something here that pertains to this provisions that we provide, elders provide for the spiritual health of the sheep. And I want you to notice something here. In James 5, verse 14, he's asked this series of rhetorical questions. Is this the case? If it is, here's what you do. And he comes down to verse 14, he says, is anyone among you sick? I take the position, he's talking about spiritual sickness, not physical. Now, if you take the position physical sickness, I have no problems with that. I believe my position presents far less difficulties in explaining the rest of the context. Listen to him. Is any among you sick? Whether it's physical or spiritual, what do? You call the preacher and say, preacher, I need help. Now, listen, if you want to call me, I'm there to help you. Brother, sister, if you're struggling, I'll do whatever I can to help you. But who does God say it's the responsibility of? Let him call for the elders of the church. Let them, the elders, pray over him. Now, my question is the elder's prayer any more powerful than the rest of us? If you've got sin in your life and you're living in sin, you've got a blockage to your prayers reaching heaven. You need to repent of that sin and open that avenue back up. But here's a man, if my position is true, that is sin sick. Who's responsible for him? The elders. Call the elders, and they need to pray over him, anointing him with oil. I apply that to the Word of God. What are you going to apply to a man that's sick? Spiritually, the Word of God. Anointing him with the oil of God in the name of, by the authority of the Lord. I take that as you got to do it. And the prayer of faith will or shall save the sick. You know, physically, sometimes that doesn't happen. Life is governed by time. We're all going to die eventually. But I know this, when you have someone praying for a sin-sick brother and they repent, you know what I know happens? I know God forgives them. The Lord will raise him up, and if he has committed sin, that word if can be translated since he has committed sins, he will be forgiven. There's elders providing for the spiritual well-being of the sheep. Number 2, protection. Matthew 7, Jesus warned of wolves in sheep's clothing. My son and I, we took a detour coming down here this evening, and we stopped after our little detour. We stopped at Wendy's for, don't do that to me. We stopped at Wendy's for lunch, and there's a guy sitting over there, and his shirt caught my attention. Had a picture of a wolf on it, and words around it says, and I've got it on my phone. I hope I can remember it. The wolves don't care about the wolves don't lose sleep over the opinion of the sheep. I thought, there's some truth in that, because the wolves, they don't care if they devour you or not. It don't mind the wolves how it affects you. It doesn't bother the wolves that your soul will be lost. And as sheep, we need protection. Acts 20 verse 28 beginning, where they're told to shepherd the church of God, which he has purchased with his own blood. Verse 29, for I know this, that after my departure savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. Also from among yourselves men will rise up, speaking perverse things, and draw away the disciples after themselves. Therefore, watch and remember. I warned you, Paul said. In the work of elders in Titus, and you got the qualifications, then keep reading about the work of elders. Verse 10, Titus 1, where there are many insubordinate, both idle talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision, Judaizing teachers, whose mouths must be stopped. We need some elders that are willing to stand up and say, brother, that is false doctrine. And give book, chapter, and verse to show why. Now watch. It's not just put them down. Look, drop down to verse 13. This testimony is true, therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. We need to stand against false teachers in hoping that first and foremost to save their souls. Because we love their souls too, don't we? And if they won't give up that false doctrine that will damn our souls, then we need to protect the rest of the sheep from them, because they're a wolf in sheep's clothing. John 10, Jesus described the hireling. What happens when the wolves come? He turns and flees. Why? The sheep's not his. We don't need shepherds like that. Why do we have elders who expose the flock to the wolves? And we do. We have elders that invite the wolves in. Why don't we have elders that ask questions before a man stands in this pulpit? I have been. Congregation that knows both me and my father. My father's preached for 50-some years. They know him and they know me, and they still said, we need you to fill out this questionnaire. You know what I did? I tell you what I didn't do. I didn't get insulted and mad and say, well, you forget it. I gladly filled it out. You want to know what I believe, what I teach, where I stand? I'll answer your questions. And if a man will not, you better put a red flag up. You better watch him. Elders are responsible for the correction. Yeah, the Bible gives the direction to the church. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and 2 Thessalonians 3. Because the whole church is to be involved. If the whole church is involved, it's not going to be effective. But who leads that? It's the shepherds. I wanted to talk to you tonight about when shepherds fail. Let me write these down. Jeremiah. The first three are from Jeremiah. Chapter 50, verse 6. Chapter 10, verse 21. Chapter 23, verses 1 and 2. To the shepherds of Israel, God said, you did not do what I said for you to do. And he condemned them. But you know who paid the price? The sheep paid the price. The sheep suffered. I respect the other men's time. I'm looking forward to the other lessons. And I'm going to heed to the time. And I will say that elders are God's shepherds here on earth. And I love godly elders. And I pray for them. May God bless these words into our hearing.
Amen.